Welcome back to the Mojo Podcast with me, Richard Stokes, and to what is the last in the current series of the Mojo Podcast. My wife and I are expecting our first baby any day now, so I'm going to press pause on the podcast for a few weeks, and it'll return in a few weeks, maybe a month or so, better than ever with more amazing guests. And today's final episode of Series 1 is an absolute cracker. Firstly though, I wanted to thank you all for listening, subscribing, and especially for leaving those wonderful reviews. I know I do ask about them every week, but they really do matter as they help people find the podcast, and personally they put the biggest grin on my face. Abby said the podcast is juicily thought-provoking, and Alice commented on the deep and raw conversations that offer great perspectives each week. And that very neatly summarises my Mojo conversation this week. To explain more, let me ask you all a question. Picture your 12-year-old self, with all that childlike imagination and curiosity with the world. Ask that 12-year-old child, if I had the chance to be anything, what would it be? It's a powerful and evocative question, and one my guest today put to himself when his mojo was at perhaps its absolute lowest. Louis Nethercott is a former Royal Marine Commando, veteran of tours in Afghanistan, and he asked himself that very question when he left the military after suffering from PTSD. His mojo story is brutally frank, certainly raw and incredibly inspiring. We talk about his wartime experiences, what he learnt from the Royal Marines, from the training and the ethos, and how he's applied that to his post-military life. Louis is very open about his struggle with PTSD and the dark place he found himself in, and how by asking himself that 12-year-old question he began to emerge from the dark and move into the light with the help of a good friend and fellow veteran. Together they crafted an idea for a huge adventure that would test them beyond anything they had experienced before. Expedition 5 was born, a world record attempt for two men walking unaided across the world's 5 biggest islands. Louis tells us about some of the deep lows and points of near death that they got into, as well as what the expedition has given him on a personal level. This is a powerful and colourful conversation, and the language is very honest too, so it's marked explicit for that reason. I love the conversation with Louis, and I really hope you enjoy the episode too. If you do, please subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and that short review that I know you've been meaning to do for some time. Okay, over to the Mojo conversation with Louis and the last of Series 1 of the Mojo Podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Mojo Podcast, and welcome to today's guest, Louis Nethercott. And Louis, just tell us where you are today, because I'm going to get a sense that you're in a slightly safer environment than we're going to talk about later on.
Yeah, so I'm just at home in Wiltshire in a little Victorian cottage. I'm in the upstairs in the second bedroom with a cup of tea, and it's quite lovely weather outside, so I'm tucked away and pretty happy.
That sounds, as I say, like a nice, safe place to be recording a podcast, and we're going to get into a lot more extremes of places you've been later on. And you say you're feeling pretty happy today, sitting there with your cup of tea. I can almost visualise it. Where would you put your mojo today out of 10?
Probably a solid 9, maybe. I mean, look, I'm sat in a lovely cottage with a cup of tea, warm, safe. Weather's lovely outside, and actually today's VE day as well. So just reflecting upon what other people have been through in the past, I'm in a pretty sweet place. So yeah, I'd say a solid 9.
Great, and I'm really pleased you mentioned VE day. For people who are listening in the UK, will understand that. Victory in Europe Day, the 75th anniversary, I think, is that right today? And so the bank holiday has been shifted so everyone can rightly celebrate that. And we're going to get into your time as a military veteran shortly, and actually the work you're doing with veterans with Help for Heroes as well. So 9 out of 10 on the Mojo, which sounds very good, as you say, in a safe, secure place. When I talk about Mojo, when you think about that word, what does it mean to you?
I think for me personally, if I was to describe, my mojo and how I'd feel, if my mojo was in a good place, what would that mean? I think it would mean for me that I'm feeling very balanced and centered in terms of knowing what I need to be happy, to be healthy. So having the right perspective and frame of mind of where I need to be, what I need to be doing, who I need around me, the really important stuff to keep me happy, positive, healthy, moving forward. That sort of mojo for me. It's about, I guess, tuning into yourself and knowing yourself and knowing what you need to be in a good place. Not necessarily what you want, even knowing what Louis needs to be happy. And yeah, at the moment, I feel I've got that pretty well balanced out at the moment, which is good.
And so knowing what Louis needs to be happy, I mean, you talked a bit about the safety and the comfort you're in right now. What are some of the other things that you reflect on, as you say, that sort of awareness of just knowing what you need?
I think, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later on, but some of the experiences I've been through really give me an insight into, what I do actually need as opposed to what I think I need, and what I've potentially been taken for granted. So something like safety, for example, to be safe, is something that a lot of people don't consider, don't even think about. They wake up in the morning in a safe house, walk to the shops in a safe environment, get what they need and walk home. But if you live in an area that's unsafe, whether it be through, as you know, maybe there's a war going on around you, or you're a bit lower down the pecking order, maybe there's some polar bears kicking around, you do feel very different when you're unsafe, So the real basic things like being safe, having access to, food and water, fresh air, having loved ones around you, people that you can really rely on and inspire you. That's all really, really important stuff that I think can often just be overlooked and taken for granted if we don't occasionally have a bit of a nudge to keep us conscious of it.
Yeah, I really like that reflection of bringing it back to what's essential around you, in that sort of sense of this hierarchy of needs that we often, I think we've, in our technological modern world, we've probably lost a sense of what we really need. I think we're all being reminded of it right now, during Corona and COVID-19. And I'm going to guess some of the experiences you've had probably give you that ability to reflect on what you truly need. Probably, especially your time in the armed forces. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's really healthy. For a start, living in somewhere like the UK where we live, for the most part, we've won the postcode lottery already just by sort of being born in a place and brought up in a place, like for me, that was England, that's safe and secure. But as humans, we're so good at adapting to what's around us and what we have. If you're a good example is how much you get paid. If you get paid 25 grand, you often probably couldn't imagine getting paid 40k a year. But once you get there and you've got that 40k a year salary, you couldn't imagine what it would be like to get paid 60k a year. But once if and when you get there, you just adapt to that amount, and that becomes the normal. And I think it's the same with environment, with freedom, with everything else. We're so good at adapting that often we can forget how important the real important stuff is, like freedom, like being able to go out and walk around, which at the moment there's limitations on that due to Corona. So this is a good example of how much a lot of us have probably been taking freedom for granted, but there's parts of the world where people live like this all the time because, they can't go out for whatever reason. A good example of that was in Madagascar. When we went on the Madagascar expedition, they have an outbreak of the bubonic plague every year. And we went out there in one of the worst plague endemics they've had for sort of, I think, 30 or 40 years. And they deal with a crisis like what we're dealing with every year on year. Thousands of people die from the plague, and they're doing that every year. So I think these experiences that I've had, a lot of them are quite extreme, but they'll be familiar with other people. People that have maybe had a traumatic experience or know someone that's had a traumatic experience. It soon puts things into perspective as to really how important the basics are and how lucky you are if you've got the basics in place, and how much of a positive impact that really can have on your life if you reflect on how lucky we are to have them there.
Yeah. Just going to switch gears slightly and start to look at your time with the Royal Marines, if that's okay, because as you've alluded to, you've experienced environments, situations around the world where people don't have that basic level of freedom and safety, and you've been in that. So thinking about your time in the Marines, which it sounds like it was a very formative time for you, can you tell us a little bit about that in terms of what you learnt and what you experienced?
Yeah, so the Royal Marines obviously are quite they've got a reputation for being quite a elite, tough bunch of chaps that go and do the business all around the world. So essentially, when you sort of join the Marines, and by the time you pass out and get your green beret and go on to do your actual job, they're really good at putting you through those experiences, which ensures that you don't take things around you for granted. And one of those things is being cold and tired and deprived of sleep. They do that a lot, so that you get used to that. So that it never gets easier being deprived of sleep, but you get used to how to handle it and how to react in those situations. It becomes something that's familiar. It doesn't become any easier. It's always miserable and cold and tired, and being cold, tired and wet's always miserable, no matter how many times you do it. But it gives you the ability to think clearly in those circumstances and almost fight through the hardship to get what you need to get done. So I think it gave me a lot of those tools. Sort of gives you a pretty solid grounding and a pretty solid toolkit that you can take forward into the rest of your life, in terms of when stuff gets hard, when shit hits the fan. You can, I guess, keep a cool head on, do certain things to get through it. In a almost in a positive way. But yeah, you sort of come away from Lympstone as a really adaptable person. What they do is they throw so many curveballs at you all the time. So just when you think you're completely spent and you've finished that 10 days in the field, they'll add another day, or they'll add another 10 miles to that particular yomp, or they'll add another couple of hours to that exercise where you have to, lie in a cold field. So there's always these little surprises that pop up. And just when you think you've got no more left in the tank and you're really fucked and you're really spent, somehow you manage to pull more out the bag and crack on and get through it.
They throw more at you.
Yeah. And it happens time and time again, to the point where you're not really bothered anymore what gets thrown at you. You just deal with it. You don't second guess it. You don't worry about it. You just deal with it when it comes.
So I was going to say, because that sorry to jump in, that resilience, the incredible resilience you're building up, I'm kind of in awe of that, really, because whenever you kind of go through stuff, everyone kind of wants a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. And if you see it, that keeps you going. If that light is then switched off, as you're kind of describing, with something else thrown at you, how on earth do you deal with that? I mean, from a Mojo point of view, maybe you're sort of go, okay, we're at day 10 now. That means tomorrow I'm going to be hopefully in a comfortable bed with a shower. And then all of a sudden, that, as you say, that curveball comes, another day.
Yeah.
How do you mentally deal with that?
Yeah, that's exactly what they do time and time again. And different people deal with that differently. It's interesting, and I've thought about this a lot, over the times, and it's interesting how different people have things to get them through. So as an example, I know for me, if I've got maybe I've got a Mars bar somewhere stashed away, I'll on an exercise or on an expedition, I know Louis will keep that Mars bar all the way through the expedition, and I'll probably have the Mars bar at the airport before we fly home. Then I'll eat it. Whereas that will be the thing that will keep me going. Is, well, tomorrow I'll have the Mars bar. Tomorrow I'll have the Mars bar. When we get to this point, that's when I'm going to celebrate with the Mars bar. But I'll just keep doing that until I get to the end, and I don't actually need the Mars bar. It's almost a symbol. It doesn't really matter that whether I eat it or not. It's a symbol for me to just keep pushing to reward myself. Whereas I know other chaps that will smash that Mars bar day one to get the calories in them, and that'll be that done, So everybody has different mentality and different ways and different strategies of dealing with it. But the real key thing that I've taken away is, if I'm really, really struggling in those situations, is I just break down what I'm doing to the smallest physical, manageable chunk of activity. And if that's lift my foot up, move it forwards and put it down, if that's what I can manage to focus on, then that's what I focus on. Literally head down, one foot in front of the other, until I come to a place where I can manage more than that. And I think, all right, well, I just need to get this mile cracked, or just get this day cracked, or in 2 weeks we're going to be at this point. But, there's many times where I've had to break it down to literally pick your foot up, put it down. Pick your foot up, put it down.
Serious micro steps along the journey, the marathon that you're undertaking at that time. And we're going to talk, I think, in more detail, and you've talked about Madagascar, and we're going to talk about Expedition 5 a lot shortly. But just staying with the Marines experience for a bit longer, what, post the training, which is, by reputation, the toughest training, certainly in the British military, maybe globally, what was the time or the moment that was most hard for you? I know you spent time in Afghanistan. How was that?
I think it's a real life of extremes living in the Marines. You're always you're always on the go. There's always something coming up on the horizon. There's always a trip imminent. You've just got back. You're usually just about to go. So it's a very dynamic way of living. And same in operations in Afghanistan. It's very, very dynamic, very busy, not a lot of rest. It's quite a extreme way of living. Usually you're either resting or you're fighting. Afghanistan for me was a real mixed bag, because it was, it was essentially what you join the military to do, or at least the Marines, to go and fight, get the bad guys and do the job. And I was lucky to do it with such a solid group of blokes. The guys that I served with in Afghanistan, some of them are, my best friends now, and they're just really, solid blokes. And it was a awesome point in time, but obviously, it's peaks and troughs, and living a life of extremes. When it goes wrong, it usually goes really badly wrong. And I was exposed to a few incidents where it did go really badly wrong for us, and that resulted in, friends and colleagues getting killed, or being exposed to quite gruesome scenes. Picking up your mates' legs or arms after they've been blown off, and putting them in your bag to ensure that nobody gets hold of them is, it's extreme stuff. It can be pretty hardcore. And it's a peculiar environment in Afghanistan, almost thinking of it not from a warfighting standpoint, but just from the dynamics that they've got going on over there. There's so many different sort of tribes and dialects of language, and it's it's a world that I really don't understand. I don't know how the tribal systems work there. I don't know what the locals really want, because it seems to change from every village to the next. So it's a real complex, dynamic place, with the war fighting thrown in on top of that, it's a mixed bag out there. And I'm really grateful for my experiences that I had in Afghanistan, but some of them were pretty punchy and quite hard to deal with.
Well, from just what you've explained there, and thank you for that, for being so honest with it. I mean, what impact did that have on you? Because I'm just guessing. We talked about your training, but I can't imagine any training that prepares you for what you saw or what you quite experienced. So what was the impact on you post Afghanistan?
I found it hard, like you said, there's the training is great and it puts you in a great place to do the job. But I think the focus is almost always on a successful outcome. So it's focused on, if something bad goes wrong, if something goes wrong badly, it's still focused on, the actions you take to get this done, to get that done, to then move forward. But sometimes it can be more complex than that. What if somebody sustains an injury that you don't know how to deal with, or that you're not qualified to deal with? What do you do with them? That's your mate in this terrible state. And you think you know what to do, you try your best, but it might not be the right thing, So you can end up in these really complex situations, which, if dwelled upon afterwards, can really trigger off lots of peculiar emotions and responses. And for me, it was probably, I guess, a year after coming back from Afghanistan, something like that. I was certainly suffering from, various symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and other bits and bobs. And, I wasn't sleeping, self-medicating with booze a lot. I was experiencing, horrible nightmares. I felt very, very disassociated to what was going on at home. Didn't really felt like I fitted anywhere. I became pissed off with the Marines. Didn't feel like I wanted to be part of the Marines anymore. And it just it really perpetuated and created a really negative downhill spiral for me. And it resulted in me being medically discharged from the Royal Marines due to post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I sort of left the Marines in quite a pretty negative place, And I think at that time it was an odd time. Lots of my friends had sustained big physical injuries. Lots of guys lost both their legs or, arms, gunshot wounds. Really catastrophic injuries. And watching them recover and them face their troubles head on in the way that they did was inspirational on one hand, and I'm really proud of how they've done and what they're doing now. But on the other hand, it kind of made me feel, how are they dealing with that? And I'm fucking struggling with this, nothing's happened to me. Nothing's fucking happened to me. And I'm on my arse,
Was that because there was almost this, they have, obviously, when you're losing a limb, there's a really obvious physical manifestation of the injury you've had, but your injury was in your mind.
Yeah, I think so, but I also think that I think due to the nature of that particular campaign, there was a lot of guys that became amputees, and so our sort of medical services and our rehabilitation services adapted to that, and that became almost the norm. And there was a very clear pathway for these guys to move through their recovery, albeit incredibly challenging for them. But there was a clear way forward. Whereas for guys like me, at that point in time, there wasn't a clear pathway for recovery and rehabilitation from psychological conditions. It was just, take some medication, try this intervention. If that doesn't work, that's pretty much, all we can offer. So, if you're not in a good place, you're going to have to leave. And I just didn't feel that there was any clear way forwards for me at the time. I just didn't know what to do with myself, and to be honest, I'm not sure anybody else knew what to do with chaps like myself at that point. So,
right,
yeah, it was a odd period.
so you found yourself, disillusioned, disassociated with your employer, I guess, but also more importantly that your fundamental, almost your adult upbringing, being within the Royal Marines, and lost. So what did you do? How did you find your next purpose, or what you just wanted to focus on next?
Yeah, it took a bit of time, and I really struggled. The symptoms that I was suffering with were pretty. It was hard work, and they did get significantly worse over a period of a couple of years, to the point where really, I was completely isolating myself from, if I could, everything. I'd try to just avoid everything. That would be going out and about, talking to people. I'd avoid that. I'd avoid contact with people I cared about, people I loved. I just tried to control everything by avoiding everything and not facing anything at all, which meant I spent a lot of time on my own in the house, not doing much. And I knew there was other guys in a similar position to me, and I kind of got to the point where, I wanted to make a change. I wanted to do something else, but I just didn't. It's back to what we were talking about earlier. Things becoming overwhelming. It was just the outside world to me. The next move was just too overwhelming. I just couldn't cope with the thought of, getting a job, writing a CV, buying some clothes to look presentable. It was just too much. So I pretty much broke it down to the simplest thing that I felt I could do at the time, and I just asked myself, as a 12-year-old child, as a sort of young lad, if I had the chance to be anything, what would I be? And this idea of being an explorer just popped straight into my head. And it sounds odd, but it was just, for me, it was the simplest way to try and find some direction. And that was kind of that ignited some kind of spark in me, some sort of passion that I hadn't felt for a long time. So I started sort of ordering, ordered a couple of old maps on Amazon, and they got delivered, and bits and pieces, just to sort of look at some ideas. I got a few maps of the Amazon basin and bits and pieces and mountain ranges and whatever, and in the end, I phoned a chap that I was in Afghanistan with, a good friend of mine, Anthony, who was in a similar place to me. Actually, he left the Marines, pretty pissed off with this whole situation, and he was working up north as a doing shellfish diving up there. Pretty hard routine. I think he was living in his van. Pretty tough life, but getting on with it. And I mentioned to him, look, I'm gonna try and do an expedition. I want to go and do a big trip. I want to go, hopefully explore, go somewhere that people haven't been before. Do you want in? And he said, yeah, mate, I'm in. When do you want to meet? And he drove down from Scotland, and we sat in, a small sort of bedroom in my house over a few bottles of scotch. We came up with a plan and created Expedition 5.
Wow. So I love that. So take us to that bedroom, a couple of bottles of scotch through, some maps on the floor. What was the plan?
Both Ant and I had been to Borneo before. Borneo is the third. Kalimantan is the third largest island on the planet. And we'd both been there before. So through a bit of research, while Ant was on his way down to my house from Scotland, I was looking at Borneo and the feasibility of crossing the island of Borneo from east to west. And these islands, we're not talking Isle of Wight, they're big. Our route across Borneo was 1,600 kilometres, I think, which is a similar distance from London Heathrow to Rome. So big old chunks of land.
Yeah.
So he turned up, and I sort of had all these maps, and I think he's the first bloke that had been in my house for about 3 months, so the place was probably a bit of a shit tip. And I've been drinking a lot, and we had this small little room, maps all over the place, books all over the place. He turned up with with a bottle of whiskey, and I had a couple stashed away up there, and we were in there for probably, I don't know, a couple of days, just drinking and going through plans. And I sort of said to him about the Borneo idea, east to west crossing of Borneo. He was really keen for that because he knew, Borneo, he'd been there before. He knew that the island's potential for, incredible exploration there. It's one of the oldest rainforests on the planet. There's the Dayak tribes, the headhunters, there's, wildlife, mountain ranges there. It's an incredible place. And so he sort of, through that research, we found it was the third largest island on the planet. And he said, "Do you know Papua New Guinea?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's the second largest island on the planet, that is. That'd be an interesting one to do, wouldn't it?" And I was like, "Yeah, that would be fucking interesting, actually." Papua. Thinking back to a David Attenborough documentary I watched when I was a kid, I was keen for that. And then we sort of wondered what the first largest island on the planet was, and it was Greenland. And I thought, fucking hell, can you imagine skiing across Greenland? That would be epic. So the top three islands, Greenland, Papua New Guinea, Borneo, are all pretty exciting places. So we looked into what the fourth and fifth were, and the fourth is Madagascar, which again, bonkers island, insane in terms of biodiversity, looked like a magical place. And then there was Baffin Island, which was the fifth, somewhere I'd never heard of, up in the Northwest Passage, home to large population of polar bears and some gnarly mountains. And we sort of were captured by these 5 islands, and we decided that we'd, as our next move in life, we were going to try and cross the 5 largest islands on the planet, unsupported and using human power alone, just us two, no one else. And that was it.
Wow. Well, I'd say that was it. And how, at that point, because you talked about it, you'd been very isolated from lots of people. You hadn't seen anyone for months. And Ant comes down from Scotland. You chew through this plan. You create this idea. How did you feel at that point?
I think, and I talked about this before. It's I think I really struggled with the symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress. They were really fucking horrible. They really were, disassociating, not knowing where you are, feeling guilty, ashamed, lost, just fucking horrible stuff. But something in addition to that I think was perhaps as hard for me was a total lack of any direction. And that was separate, in my mind, that was always separate to the symptoms, the medical symptoms I was suffering with. That was a life piece. I didn't know where I was going and what I was doing. In the Marines, it was so clear. In your uniform, you belong to something. You're always told what to do and where to go. But Expedition 5, even just in those initial stages in a bedroom with Ant, with a load of maps, straight away I felt a bit of direction being put back into my life. I had a bit of focus. I had somewhere to channel my energy, and it was towards this plan. And a bit like my Mars bar, keeping the Mars bar in my bag till the end of the expedition, it almost didn't really matter what Expedition 5 was at that point. It was just an idea that gave me some direction to move forward in. So things started to shift for the positive. I felt passionate about something. I felt real passion when I looked through, these crazy maps that we managed to borrow from the Bodleian Library that were from sort of just post-war of Papua New Guinea, where there's, old airstrips from the Second World War and all these little gold mines of potential exploration. I felt real passion when I was looking at that. And that's when things started to shift for me towards the more positive.
Brilliant. So, the story of Expedition 5, and there's a very good website, which I will put a link to in the show notes so everyone can see a lot about it. You're 4/5 of the way through it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but with Baffin Island to go. And you would have been doing that now if it weren't for Corona. But with that experience, and look, we could do a whole series of a podcast just on Expedition 5, because I just know there's just so much in it. But could you just share with us a bit of the experience so far? Maybe, the most dangerous, the point of where you've been at your lowest, and also where's the joy come from? Because there was obviously a lot of joy at that planning stage, and now I've got purpose and direction in life. But where was the actual joy when you were in it?
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's countless tales and memories from the trip so far. I think a real big point for me, a real game changer for me, was on the first expedition in Borneo. We had got to the centre of Kalimantan, to a mountain range called the Mulashwana mountain range, and it's caped in ancient rainforest. It is properly in the middle of nowhere. We were properly deep in the jungle at this point, and we had our eyes on a settlement that was about 40 kilometres away, and we hoped that the settlement was there, but we were working off maps from the 60s, so there's a good chance that the settlement wasn't even there. We didn't have any money to support a backup plan if anything went wrong, so we had nobody on standby to come and get us. If we got it wrong, we were a good chance we'd just fucking die in the jungle, to be honest. And while we were heading towards this village, we hit the Mulashwana mountain range, and we came across some terrain that was just unexplainable in terms of it was like muddy mangrove mountains, and one day we did I think just shy of 10 hours, really best effort, pushing through this mud, and we had to take our bergens off, pull our bergens on rope, and then do another 100 meters, bergens off, pull the bergens on rope, another 100 meters. We did that for 10 hours, just a horrendous day. And sat down with mud all over his face at the end of the day, looked at the GPS, and he said, "Mate, we've done 950 meters today." And I couldn't believe it. I was like, "Mate, you're joking. That's GPS must be fucked. There's no chance, And I went through this whole process of realization that he was right. We had done less than a kilometer in a day. And the energy and effort we'd put into that was just, it just put me on my arse. I could not comprehend doing another day of that, let alone another week, let alone another month or 2 months to get through it. So we changed our course because we didn't have enough food at the rate we were going to get to this settlement. We changed our course to aim for a headwater of a river, to hope that we'd be able to get on this river. If we made a raft, we could hopefully get on this river and make up some ground. Long story short, we got to the river, and on the raft, on the way down, the bamboo raft we made got caught in some rapids, and I got pinned underneath a big fallen fig tree. Dark, cold under there. All I could hear was water rushing past my ears. I felt a pressure change, and I was under there for as long as I could be. My lungs, were done, and I was properly, I was like, right, don't panic, try and move, and I couldn't move, and all I could feel was this slippery log, and I thought, I'm gonna die here in this bloody river in the middle of Borneo. But it was peculiar. My body almost it was almost like a sort of miniature fit, and it sort of just did enough to get me free, and I got sucked under this log and popped up the other side. And Ant was on a bank downriver, and he dragged me in, and I pretty much, nearly drowned. I certainly had water in my lungs. I was in and out of consciousness and stuff. And the real big piece for me after that was kind of the point in time where I actually realised that there was value to my life, and I wanted to be alive, which I'd been questioning for a long time up until this point.
Right.
But to me, that was a real clear indicator in my mind. That was like, well, if I didn't want to be alive, I would have just stayed under there and just let the river take me. But I didn't do that. I made an effort to survive. So for me, that was a real clear turning point in my mind. That was like, okay, so I do want to be here. I do want to be alive. Life does have a value to me. I do miss my family. I do want to go home. So that was a real game changer, that experience for me. because it showed that I did actually have value in myself and wanted to be alive. So yeah, there's been many other experiences. I sort of fell down a sort of small crevasse in Greenland and was knocked unconscious. Plummeted quite a way, probably 30 or 40 meters onto an ice shelf. At night, we were going through a crevasse field at night, and I was snowblind in one eye. So I had one eye patched over, and gave me a warning. He was leading the way because I couldn't have a head torch on because it was so painful on my eye. So I was sort of following Ant's light with one eye through a crevasse field at night. And Ant gave me a warning about a particularly treacherous bit, and I got it wrong, and down I went. But with both my pulks pulled me down, landed on top of me.
And your pulks are
what you pull all your kit in. So in the Arctic,
I was like the sleds.
Skiing, you pull your kit, like a couple of sleds behind you. Yeah, so we had 2 sleds each. So I sort of plummeted down this cold abyss, and I woke to Ant calling from me up top, and he climbed down. He did quite a technical rescue to pull me out of there, which I'm very grateful for. He's a good lad. So yeah, that was another occasion where I nearly got it wrong. There's been countless occasions of times like that, to be honest, for both of us.
Well, it sounds like you've really put yourselves, both of you, through, as you say, that word extreme comes to mind, the most extreme of situations. And out of interest, just going back to the Marines, did the Marines training prepare you for Expedition 5, like the rescue techniques and the like?
Not really, and this was another thing that we got quite wrong. And I will be the first guys to say that we're not experts at exploration. We do this stuff just basically mostly on intuition and common sense, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But the Marines, we assumed, being hardcore Royal Marines, that we'd be able to get this stuff done. But it's so different to a 2-man team, just me and Ant, with no support in the middle of these huge islands. It's very different to being in the Marines with a company's worth of men behind you to support you. Helicopters and food and medics and all this support. But what the Marines does do is it gives you the ability to stick to a really hard routine for a long period of time. So it taught us the discipline we needed to, in Greenland, when the tent's getting covered with snow and it's blowing outside and it is so cold that getting out the tent feels like you're jumping into an ice bath. It hurts your bones. It's so cold, it actually hurts your bones to go outside the tent. But you have to get out there every 20 minutes and uncover the snow on the tent, because otherwise the tent will collapse. What the Marines does is it gives you the skills, the drills, the confidence in your ability to just do what needs to be done, no matter what, no matter how shit and cold it is and wet. If you've got to go out every 20 minutes, then you've got to go out every 20 minutes, and you just do that until you don't have to do it anymore. That's what the Corps gave us, yeah.
And so where this expedition, this is of course I say quite some undertaking. That's a massive understatement. But where has the joy been? Obviously, on that riverbank in Borneo, when you realised your life had value, obviously that's a moment of joy. But were there times when it was actually fun in the moment?
There's these little experiences that we've had that are just absolutely magical to me. And one was in Papua New Guinea. We decided we were right in the heart of Papua New Guinea in the jungle, and we decided that we'd had enough and we just needed to stop for a couple of days and recharge. So we got to a settlement and we asked if we could stay there. And, in Papua New Guinea, there's a lot of tribal warfare going on. There's a lot of lots of people that get, regularly get murdered. They settle most of their differences with a machete, with a bush knife, and it's not uncommon to see people chopped up, here and there. So it can be a dangerous place. But we got to this one settlement, asked if we could stay for a couple of days. They were happy with that. And the following day, I went on a little expedition into the jungle with a little tribe of young lads. They were probably between 3 and 7, and there was about 6 or 7 of them and me, and they were all naked. I was naked, and we were bombing around the jungle. They were like little lost boys out of Peter Pan, you know. They were bombing around the jungle, they were collecting little lizards and little spiders in a coconut husk. And I was helping them collect these little lizards and these little spiders. And then one of them just got a little fire together. And, you know, I sat there in the middle of this ancient magical rainforest with these young lads that will have never seen a white bloke before, roasting frogs and spiders over a fire. And it sat there eating these little charred spiders and lizards with these little tribe of young lads, you know. And it's just such a different experience to, you know, life at home. It's just, I got a snapshot of what it must be like to live that life properly, you know. And it was just an awesome experience to share with those little young lads. You know, they were showing me where they get their food from and how they live, and it was just, you know, really grateful for that experience. So there's been a few of them along the way as well.
From what you're saying, that in the moment there can be these wonderful moments of joy, which I guess propel you forward. And I know you haven't quite finished, and you will finish Expedition 5. I think is next year the plan, or later this year. What's the plan?
Yeah, our sort of planning. It seems that there's kind of one window in the year to execute our route across Baffin Island, and that looks to be sort of the start of next year. So sort of probably mid-February, we'll head out there and try and get this one cracked.
And so from 4/5 of the way through this incredible adventure, what has been your reflection on yourself and how you've developed through this and what you've taken from it?
Reflection is a big thing. You know, that life in the Marines, you don't get encouraged to reflect upon and properly digest things psychologically. So just giving myself more time to really think about what's, you know, the experiences that I've had and what I've learned from them. So, but, you know, I've learned so much along the way. And I think the biggest thing for me, and the thing that I use, you know, regularly, is just I focus a lot of energy into maintaining a perspective on life, knowing what I know about the hardships that other people have. You know, I really try to keep those memories and keep those experiences fresh in my mind and not take what I have for granted. You know, I know what it's like to be in an unsafe place, and I don't want to lose that, because if I lose that, it means I'm slipping back into what I talked about earlier, adapting to this way of life, which is great. And I love my life here, and I'm really lucky to have it. But without that perspective, it can just become everything for granted. So I really try to anchor on those experiences I've had to maintain a perspective, and it enriches my life, you know, here for sure.
Well, Louis, we're kind of running sort of more or less out of time now. I really appreciate your time and your generosity and your honesty and sharing all that's happened to you. Final question I always ask people, and you've talked a little bit to this already, but are there things you're doing for yourself on a daily or a frequent basis that really help you with your mojo?
Two things, I think, for me. One is the perspective piece that I've talked about. That is really important. And I try to put focus energy into that consciously every day. And I do that in various ways. You know, I've got maps on the walls at home of areas that I've travelled through that were particularly hard, so that I can look at those contours on those mountain ridges and remember what it was like to be there and how tough it was and how all I wanted was to just be at home, you know. So I focus on that regularly to keep perspective. The other thing is I surround myself with people that are an inspiration to me. And, you know, I find that is something that is a game changer. You know, my friends, my family, the people, you know, like Ant, who I do the expeditions with, the people I work with, they are truly inspirational people to me. And I found by surrounding myself by people that inspire me just gives me so much more clarity around what's important for me and where I want to go and who's important to have in my life. So those things, keeping perspective and surrounding myself with inspirational people, are two things that have been huge game changers for me over the last few years.
And two things that we can all think about, reflect on, and do more of. I think that sense of perspective and having the right people around you is just something we can absolutely we can all take on board. Louis Nethercott, thank you so much for joining us on the Mojo podcast and sharing your story.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Oh, I love that conversation with Louis. Just enjoyed every single second of it. It can be a bit of a cliche to say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but I think that certainly is absolutely true for Louis. I found his humility to be just quite astonishing. To have done so much, been through so much, and be so humble about it is incredible. Now, Expedition 5 isn't really about a record attempt, but it's about his own personal recovery and true sense of purpose. As he says, he is now much more reflective about life and experiences, and that reflection means he focuses on maintaining perspective in life, not taking anything for granted, and the importance of key people in his life, going from essentially isolating himself post-Marines to reaching out to a friend and finding solace in an adventure that they went on together. We can all learn from Louis' experience, I believe. Don't take life for granted. Create anchors to remind you of experience that you've had and surround yourself with inspiring people. Yes, this conversation was full of humility, courage and clarity for sure. In the show notes, you'll find a brilliant website for Expedition 5 where you can read much more about the adventure and you can support the final leg across Baffin Island, which will be happening in early 2021 via the Just Giving page that I'll also post a link to. I have a feeling there'll be much more news about Expedition 5 post the completion of that challenge, so look out for them both about this time next year, I guess. I wish Louis and Ant all the best as they push on and finish this epic expedition. And yes, this also marks the end of Series 1 of the Mojo Podcast. Wow, what a journey we've been on over the last 6 months. I want to thank all my amazing guests for their honesty and bravery in sharing their stories. 17 powerful and inspiring stories so far. If you missed some, you can go back and listen whenever you like. They'll be there online for you. And I want to thank all of you for listening and the support you've given the show through ratings and reviews. I think the format has struck a chord with many of you, and your messages of support really spur me on when, yes, well, sometimes my own mojo is a little bit low. I've learnt so much and I think developed as a host as we've gone from week to week, so thank you for staying with the show. Please do let me know if you have any ideas for the next series, especially on people I should interview. I'm looking for those brave and inspiring people with real mojo stories to share. It would be remiss of me not to remind you to rate and review this episode when you have a second. But for now, it's hasta luego, not goodbye, as I'll be back here soon. But until then, I truly hope your mojo continues to flow.